Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Ohio Has Issues. I'm Stephanie Haney.
I'm Mike Polk. Thanks for joining us so much where we, here on Ohio Has Issues, where we have conversations about Ohio politics and bring you up to speed on what you need to know. And this week we have one very specific topic that we're going to be discussing. What is that?
Yes, we have a rousing topic that we've talked about before. We're going to talk about it again. Redistricting here in Ohio.
Yes, we're going to keep talking to you about this all right up to the election. It's going to probably make the ballot. It's rounding the bend on the signatures right now. It's about how we draw our districts here in Ohio. Right now, a little lopsided. Some might say that we are egregiously gerrymandered here in Ohio. We're going to talk to some experts today. We're going to talk to some people who are trying to make some change, and we're going to give you what you need to know for November.
Yep, that's all coming up for you. We're going to lay that all out. And there was a new study that was done about it that particularly talks about Ohio. So we'll kind of give you the lowdown on that as well. We've also got the roundup for you, as we do each week.
Yeah, we'll tell you what's going on in the Senate campaign. Remember, you are in one of the most important Senate races in the country that could decide the sway of the Senate. That's you guys. We'll give you a quick update on both Mr. Moreno and Mr. Brown.
But first, we're going to start with a little bit of what's going on around the state of Ohio. We're going to talk again about something else that we've talked about with you before, whether President Joe Biden will be on the ballot in Ohio.
Still not on our ballot, folks.
Still not.
Not on the ballot.
Still not. So
working on it.
Here is a little bit of background just so you know why this is an issue here in Ohio, where Ohio has issues. Ohio law requires that political parties certify their candidates 90 days on or before the upcoming election. Well, that's a problem because the Democratic National Convention starts 75 days before the general election in November.
That seems like kind of a technicality, Stephanie. It seems like that should be an easy thing to overcome.
Well, you would think, and a lot of other states have overcome it, but here in Ohio, they have not yet. So let's get up to speed on what the latest lawmakers are saying about it. We've got Ohio Capitol Journal reporter Megan Henry to fill us in. All right, Megan Henry, thank you for being back with us this week on Ohio Has Issues with our Ohio Roundup. And you published a very interesting piece of journalism this week about what's going on with President Joe Biden and will or won't he be on the Ohio ballot. So the first thing I want to ask you is, what have you heard from Republican legislators this week about it?
Yes, well, first off, thanks so much for having me back. And yes, I've heard from Ohio House Speaker Jason Stephens that Joe Biden will be on the ballot, but this fix will not come through the legislator. And that's something that Democrats agree on. They also are saying that Joe Biden will be on the ballot, very confident that will happen, but they also are saying that this fix won't happen through the legislator. So something that Republicans and Democrats can both agree on is that Joe Biden will be on the ballot, but it won't happen through the legislator at this point.
Okay, and what's Governor Mike DeWine saying about this?
He is saying that this fix needs to happen, and he's urging lawmakers to have it done through the legislator. And then he did say that it could be done through the courts as well, but it sounds like he wants it to be done through the legislator, through his lawmakers.
But they're saying that's not going to happen. So, this isn't the only thing that's happening in Ohio, actually. I know you've reported on some things that are happening in other states as well, just to kind of give people broader context as to what's happening here. What are other states doing to fix this problem?
Yes, so Alabama had a similar issue where the deadline for them to certify their candidates wasn't lining up with the Democratic National Convention date in August. And so Alabama, earlier this month, they put forward a bill and it passed it seemingly without much hiccup in their General Assembly, and their Republican governor signed it into law. So other states are having success through the legislator. Now, there could be a bill with an emergency clause added to it. So it's not totally out of the realm of possibility that this could happen through the legislator, but it was very interesting to hear both Democrats and Republicans say that it won't happen that way.
But yet they're confident that he will be on the ballot.
Yes, that is correct. But how remains the question.
That, that is something, I consider myself to be an educated person who pays attention. I'm just wondering what they think is going to happen in order to get it on the ballot if they're not willing to do it in the legislature.
Yeah, that's kind of the question. It seems likely at this point that it'll probably wind up in court and it'll be done legally. So we will be monitoring whatever happens with that. That's the avenue that they end up taking.
All right, Megan, we really appreciate it. Thank you for bringing us a perspective from Columbus where our leaders are. We will hopefully see you back here soon on Ohio Has Issues.
Thanks for having me.
So, a little bit of a quandary we find ourselves in there. I do want to mention, Megan talked about court action to get President Joe Biden on the ballot in Ohio. So what she's talking about there is, you may or may not be aware that the United States Supreme Court stopped Colorado from keeping former President Donald Trump off the ballot in Colorado. That was a completely different issue, by the way.
Yeah, they were trying to say he was an insurrectionist, and the Supreme Court said, you can't keep him off the ballot. And so they've had recent history of the Supreme Court actually having to make decisions like this about keeping candidates on ballots. So, it's not that long ago.
Yeah, so I do know that President Joe Biden's team is confident that he will be on the ballot, but it seems like our legislators are confident that it will not be happening in the legislature to make that happen.
Yes. So what are the options here? Like what actually could end up happening? Do you have any idea?
Well, in the world of possibilities, the lawmakers could actually pass something that would allow the certification to happen in a shorter time frame that's not 90 days. But we seem to be hearing that does not seem to be something they're willing to do. Another option.
Go ahead, please.
Well, another option is that the Democratic National Convention could get bumped up, or they could do something to officially certify him here in Ohio ahead of the convention.
Just a reminder, we have precedent right here in Ohio within like the last decade. This has happened twice in 2 of the last 3 elections, and they have found a fix for it in the legislature that they're not willing to do now. And this is petty politics is what it is. They're just being very petty about it. They don't want to be the people who help Joe Biden get on the ballot, obviously. They think that would be somehow a poke in the eye to their constituents who want them to fight every inch, I guess. And it's pretty gross. Frankly, it's pretty gross. But he's going to end up on the ballot. I think it's bad politics personally, because I think in the long run, they just look like they're being petty. And we'll see how it resolves. But there's going to be a fix for it one way or another. They'll find some kind of a deal, and you'll be able to vote for the person that I think, 9 million? I don't know how many people. A bunch of people wanted to be our Democratic candidate here in Ohio.
Yeah, he did win the primary handily here in Ohio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, what do we got next? Oh, I know what we're talking about next. We've got a new tobacco law that is having some trouble in the courts. Is that right?
Yes. So this is interesting, and this has some possible ramifications in other places. So we'll kind of see what happens there. But Ohio lawmakers had passed a law that would ban cities from controlling the sales of tobacco in cities, ban it, more specifically than than is already happening at the state level. So be able to put additional restrictions on it at the local level.
People want to be able to put restrictions on flavored tobaccos to help kids avoid having kids get a hold of them and stuff like that. And certain cities are more adamant about that than other places, and they want the ability to not police the whole state, but just police their area. And it ran into a buzzsaw.
Right. So state lawmakers tried to do away with the ability for cities to do that. But a court has ruled that is actually unconstitutional. So we'll get the details now from NBC Cleveland reporter Matt Rascon.
Another development in the debate over tobacco regulation. Last year, the Ohio General Assembly passed a law that bans cities from regulating tobacco and nicotine products, giving that power to the state. Governor Mike DeWine vetoed it. The legislature overrode his veto. Then in April, Cleveland and more than a dozen other cities sued the state.
We got a win in court where the judge said that, yes, cities should be able to have their own tobacco laws.
Dr. David Margolius is the public health director for Cleveland, which has one of the highest smoking rates in the country.
We've got an issue here. We'd like to address it.
He says the judge's ruling allows the city to regulate, but he says there is still more work to do to help city council get on board.
It just irks me because at the end of the day, I'm concerned that there will be an underground market because somebody's going to find a way to sell these.
In a recent health committee meeting, Council President Blaine Griffin had concerns about restricting flavored tobacco and nicotine products.
I just think, why aren't we focusing more on education as opposed to saying ban?
Margolius says education classes will start this summer. The city has 600 tobacco retailers, he says, and 4 out of 5 schools have a shop within a couple of blocks.
Just kids, walking home, if they pop into a convenience store for a bite to eat or a drink, are just overwhelmed with flavored tobacco products and flavored vapes, which are, very clearly designed to try and attract kids.
I reached out to a group that represents smoke shops across the state to get their response to the judge's ruling. They told me the endless battles to restrict individual freedoms and undermine public rights are a misguided use of public funds. Instead, they said we should focus on meaningful initiatives that promote public health, safety, and education. we will continue to fight for the fundamental right of individuals to make informed choices about their own lives, free from government overreach and unnecessary regulations.
That was Matt Rascon. Thank you for that, Matt.
That kid's got chops, man.
Yeah.
Rascon.
What's up?
He does. He's a legit journalist.
And what I thought was really interesting about this is that if this had gone the other way, that would have maybe kind of put some wrenches into things for recreational marijuana.
Yes.
You know, because there are certain localities that don't want to allow the sale of marijuana in their localities, and that's allowed right now.
And that is their option. It's actually comparable to what Michigan is doing up north, from what I hear. Anyways, but they have the same thing where a community or a city has the right to opt out and say, we don't want any marijuana dispensaries here, or we do. And apparently about 70% of Michigan said, no thanks. But then the 30% is just like, yeah, we'll take the traffic and we'll take the tax revenue that comes to this area probably. We'll get our school a swimming pool and we'll build a Taco Bell over there and they'll make a mint as well.
Yeah.
So it'll be same thing here in Ohio where people will get to pick and choose. But you're right, it is different, or it's interesting what they're allowing for home rule and what they won't.
Right. So also, we should point here, the state is expected to appeal this, so it's not necessarily over yet, but that's kind of where things stand right now. Right now, cities can regulate the way they want to when it comes to flavored tobacco and those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. All right, let's get to our latest roundup from the Senate race.
Okay,
here in Ohio.
so I'll go first. I'll talk about Sherrod Brown news, and here's what he did this week that's kind of interesting. Is Sherrod Brown is all about that ganj as of this week. Wasn't always, but he tweeted this out, a social media post that said, it's time to legalize marijuana across the country. Now that might not sound very novel to you, but this is a bit of a switch for him. He has always been a bit wishy-washy on this, frankly. After he told reporters in 2022 that he did not back the wholesale legalization of marijuana, but did want to decriminalize it at the time to address the problem of people imprisoned for possessing small amounts. But he wasn't at that point yet. That was 2022. So he has obviously evolved on this a bit, and he is now saying that he is for it. In fact, he on, you know what that famous marijuana day is, if you'll recall? Remember?
420.
That 420. On 420, I can't believe we missed this. We did our show before, but he posted on social media, "Happy 420." This was him hinting.
Did he really?
He did, and then he said, "We need to legalize marijuana at the federal level." So he actually called for this first on 420. And his post was made at 4:20 p.m. So whatever.
Well, that's very appropriate.
Honestly, whatever 25-year-olds running that social media account, you got at least two people. You impressed at least two of us. So nice work.
Sure did.
So obviously, how does his opponent, Bernie Moreno, stand
I'd love to know.
on marijuana? He had a statement that came out. He is not as pro-marijuana as Sherrod Brown. He said that he does find it ironic that Brown wants to legalize marijuana nationally and also supports banning menthol cigarettes, so he sees that as a conflict. And then here's a quote from the statement. "I do not support recreational marijuana personally. We already have an epidemic of drugs in our country that's leading to a crushing mental health crisis. As for my position as a U.S. Senator, I believe it is an issue for the states to decide. And if the states do legalize it, the federal government shouldn't block access to financial institutions the voters of Ohio have decided." So that's where he stands.
Yeah, that's an interesting factor there too about that lack of access to federal banking institutions if you are in the marijuana business.
Yeah, you're right.
Which, if you don't know anything about, you should go back and watch our episode on marijuana legalization here.
We
in
watch
Ohio.
it at least twice a week.
It's a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
Also, just one other quick update from the Moreno campaign. We do know that his team had a private fundraiser this week. It was in Chagrin Falls. That was last Friday. It was at the home of a person named Mitch Bolus. And other detail we know from that is that the U.S. Senator from Alaska, Dan Sullivan, was there.
Look at that hot car in the ad. How can anybody resist that?
That
You got
is
a hot car right there?
Fancy looking ride.
All right. So
that's your update on the Ohio Senate race.
that's what we know from a rough Google.
Yeah.
But now we got to get onto our main topic, which is redistricting, which I still contend is one of the biggest issues that we have here in Ohio and could solve a lot of our problems, a lot of our issues, if we were just to be able to fix one little thing, and that is the way that we apportion our districts, which should be a bit more fair.
Well, it's definitely a problem that we've gotten ourselves into a situation where the legislatures are selecting who will vote for them.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
I mean, they've
and
got
that's
this
a bipartisan statement across the board.
100%, and they've got this down to such a science now, where they have where they can run an actual program that tells you we've got this many Democrats here, we've got this many people who voted Republican here, and they can seriously just draw these perfect districts that only make sure that their preferred candidates are safe.
Mm-hmm. And political parties really have a virtual certainty in a lot of these districts, which we'll get into more of those statistics on
We will.
a little bit later. But just to give you a little reminder of why we're here, a group called Citizens Not Politicians, why we're talking about this today, they have a proposed constitutional amendment that they're trying to get on the ballot coming up in November. What that would do is it would take elected officials out of the process, kind of like we just described to you. What's happening right now is elected officials are in control of what our voting districts look like.
Seems wise to get them out of the mix.
That's what I would say. I mean, it seems pretty common sense, and some states are having success with kind of piloting these programs and working these programs out around the country.
Yes.
So the proposal needs a certain amount of signatures from half of our 88 counties. They got to have them by July 3rd. So we've got investigative reporter Lynna Lai. She's kind of looked into this, and she's got an update for us on where that stands and how it would work if people vote for it.
Backing this effort say they already have more than 600,000 signatures that are unverified so far. So in the end, they need about 413,000 valid signatures to get this on the ballot. Volunteers with the League of Women Voters today were at the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo gathering signatures for this proposed constitutional amendment that would replace the current process, which is run entirely by politicians, with a 15-member citizens panel made up of 5 Republican, 5 Democrat, and 5 independent voters. So this is a look at the state's current maps, and between the shades of red and blue, you can kind of get a sense of the partisan leanings. The maps have been the subject of many court battles since Ohio voters overwhelmingly passed redistricting reform in 2015, and leading the effort for this constitutional amendment is retired Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor. She is a moderate Republican who was the swing vote when the court ruled that the maps were unconstitutionally drawn to give one party an unfair advantage.
This truly is a citizen initiative, citizen supported, and we are looking forward to real reform with teeth.
So supporters want to make sure that they have more than enough signatures to pass muster by a July 3rd deadline.
All right, thank you for that, Lena.
LL on top of it. Also, I saw our coworker Lydia sneeze in the background at the end.
Is
Sorry
that what
about
that was?
Yes, Gesundheit. In the past, Lydia.
It was very enthusiastic.
It
whatever
was.
It was. I like somebody who really gets into a sneeze.
Mm-hmm. So, as you can see, it's a bit of an issue, and that's why we're going to talk to people about how to fix it.
Yeah, so I want to introduce you to an organization, if you're not aware, the Brennan Center for Justice. This is another group that is supporting this initiative. It's based out of New York University School of Law. It's a progressive nonprofit law and public policy institute, and they conduct their own research and they publish their own studies, and they did publish a study very specifically about this recently. And the headline of this study from a national organization is, quote, Ohio's gerrymandered state house districts lack electoral competition. And the subhead there is, quote, the majority of Ohioans live in districts where general election outcomes are all but locked in before any votes are cast.
Not ideal. Always nice to get some national press. Especially 1 out of 50, and we're getting a special shout out. Wish it wasn't for that, unfortunately, but you know it must be an issue because there's gerrymandering all across this great nation of ours, and to get a special shout out
for how bad it is,
just tells you how how hard we're doing it. I had a chat with somebody from the Brennan Center about these results. This is he's an expert on redistricting. It's Dr. Kareem Crayton, and we had a nice little chat about it. All right, my guest today, Dr. Kareem Crayton, and he is the Senior Director of Voting and Representation at the Brennan Center for Justice. Thank you for joining us, Kareem.
Pleasure to be with you.
We just established that you've never been to Cleveland, but you are going to visit here soon because you are missing out.
I am, obviously. While I haven't been there, many of my members of the team have been there, and I want to see exactly what all the goings-on are, and want to see all of this important democracy enhancing action unfold myself.
That's what I like to hear right there. So yeah, come over, help fix our state, because let me tell you, it's a little messy. Your Brennan Center for Justice analyzed Ohio's current maps alongside the results to the last primary election, and this is a pretty recent study you guys did. Tell us a little bit about the results in a nutshell.
Sure. Two of my colleagues, Yuri Radinsky and Gina Feliz, worked on an ongoing part of how we're analyzing and trying to tell the story of what's going on in Ohio and what needs to be fixed to make sure that citizens have their say in political action. And what we learn is, of course, things that we know about gerrymanders in general. Ohio has one of the worst gerrymanders in the country. It seems, despite efforts to find, legislators to help, courts to help, there's still been some resistance. And what we see as a result of gerrymander in this state are two things that happen a lot. One, we have uncompetitive districts, more of them than there are competitive districts. And I can say a little bit about that. In this last election, there were a total of about 40 some odd districts out of 99, more than half, 47, that were either uncontested, where there was no option for the general election, or uncompetitive, where even if there were two candidates on the map, they are so stacked because of gerrymandering that the outcome is more or less predetermined. And so when more than half of your districts are pretty much decided by the time people sign their candidate qualification forms on election day, it doesn't really give much encouragement for people to really participate. And that's the other feature of gerrymanders that are really problematic, that we find people, when they don't really have a choice, aren't really motivated to show up and vote. And these are choices that have, of course, real consequences, because state legislatures make any number of decisions affecting people, going from healthcare, including reproductive rights, to what opportunities they have to get jobs. And of course, it's to say nothing of all the statewide contests that if fewer than half of the people who are eligible show up and vote, and we're talking really small numbers when it comes to some of these uncompetitive districts, it really gets to the point where very few of our elected people are having to answer to the public in competitive contests.
Which kind of only rewards extremism, and that means in the primary, the person who's probably the more party purist is going to end up winning, and that means probably less of a motivation to compromise.
That's exactly part of it, that we see really then the action, the spotlight in governance is really on the politicians rather than the citizens. And when we have district elections, we really think that's the one moment in particular where the citizens' wants and desires ought to get reflected in outcomes. But you're right, in the absence of that, the most extreme form of a given political perspective usually wins the day, and we have very few places where folks seeking the middle are really driving the action.
Now, you say Ohio is one of the most gerrymandered states. That's nothing that we're very proud of, but have other states recently made any sort of adjustments or amendments that have proved beneficial to at least limiting the effects of gerrymandering?
Well, there have been a lot of states that have moved towards what the Brennan Center views as sort of the gold standard in trying to get systems that reflect public wants and needs, and that's the independent, citizen-driven redistricting process. We know, some of the early adopters of this were places like Arizona and California. They have been joined by more states. Colorado is more recently in the mix. And there are several states that are talking about that now. I won't mention that a couple states to the north of Ohio.
Very good.
Considering
learning. Nice.
And yeah, and it's a place where people are learning that when you have these opportunities, people show up. And even when, as in the case of that state up north, Michigan, when courts step in and say you didn't do it as well as you could have, what you learn very quickly is there's a record that shows what the commission did, and that they can go back very quickly and correct the challenge. And that's what's missing when you have a legislature that's stuck in the mud on a particular outcome that they want, even in the face of judges telling them this doesn't comply with the law. That's what, in many ways, the independent commission responds to.
I assume you're aware Ohio has an anti-gerrymandering ballot measure that will be on the ballot, most likely. We're getting signatures for it right now. Have you been able to examine that, or have you seen it yet? And is it along the lines of what you think would be useful?
Well, the Brennan Center, I'm proud to say, has worked in close collaboration with a lot of organizations that are based in Ohio that have been working for years in trying to get a lot of this change on the ballot. and actually in practice, including the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. And yes, we're very happy and fortunate to be happy endorsers of this provision. It really puts the opportunity for citizens first to craft a system that have aspects of getting people who are average, everyday Ohioans to be a part of the process and to really drive the action. And it really takes the process out of the hands of elected politicians, but really focusing on people who are actually interested in hearing what communities in Ohio want. And that really becomes the core of how the process will be driven. Ohioans will make decisions, but they will hear from Ohioans in putting together the evidence that pushes the map in one direction or another, and not party leaders.
We already voted on this recently here in Ohio, just a few years back, to try and amend our horribly gerrymandered redistricting system, and it didn't stick. State House maps that we're working with right now, we are under unconstitutional maps. They were declared unconstitutional 5 times by a bipartisan majority of our Ohio Supreme Court, and we are still using them in spite of that. I guess what I'd say there is, how are Ohioans supposed to be inspired to want to change things like this when it seems like even when we change these things, they're like, no, it doesn't matter. We don't accept it.
Sometimes, reform is a trial and error process. And what's different about prior efforts and this one is, again, with this approach, it's tried and true. There are states that have actually used citizen-focused provisions, not bipartisan commissions that take elected leaders of each party, but really citizens, some of whom may have partisan affiliations, some of whom may have no partisan affiliation. But really the joint enterprise is a focus on thinking about what citizens, not just the people on the commission, but people in the public want, and the process of actually giving evidence about what works and what doesn't work about communities being joined together is really the exercise that the citizens who are driving the commission will be a part of. And really, when that's the focus, it is very difficult when people join hands and understand everybody has to benefit in order for the thing to work, that it ultimately will yield what you described earlier, that effort to find the middle, something that is good and supportive and doesn't leave anyone out. That's really the purpose of a citizens-based commission. And when it's outside of the normal push and pull between D's and R's, that kind of approach is possible. And if ever it's going to happen, it's got to be where people are deciding, the voters that actually share joint enterprises, that should be in the process of choosing who their elected representatives are going to be.
All right. We are on the precipice now of possibly fixing this system. We appreciate all of your help. We appreciate your information, and we're really going to appreciate it when you give us that visit to Cleveland and come and hang out. Let us show you a good old time of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and whatnot.
I promise it's coming. I look forward to it.
All right. Thanks for trying to help our state. We appreciate you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Take good care.
That was Dr. Crayton from the Brennan Center, giving us the details.
He, just so you know, insisted that I didn't call him doctor. He's like, don't. You know how some PhDs aren't all about that. Some PhDs are like, I prefer doctor. Or they let you know, even if they don't. Right. They're just like, well, you could call me a doctor, or you can, whatever you prefer. And then you're like, oh, doctor. But he didn't.
Bio on the website says doctor.
Yeah, he's a doctor.
Yep. So we do have some of the statistics from the Brennan Center study that we were talking about there. So the results showed that Ohio's U.S. Senate race between Brown and Marino likely to be competitive. No surprise there. But that is a statewide race. Districts don't matter.
Don't matter none.
In that race. The whole state votes on that, okay? But the down ballot races probably will not be competitive here in Ohio. That's where the districts matter. So here are some specific statistics that we'll share with you from the Brennan Center results. 77% of Ohio residents live in districts where elections for state representatives are not in serious dispute. That's either because only one candidate is running or because of party advantage from district lines, aka gerrymandering, which is why we're talking about redistricting today.
Now, if we were being positive, we could say that 23% are fair. I know. I'm just being Pollyanna over here.
That's true.
Okay.
We could, but it's definitely
a bad thing.
77% of Ohio residents.
Okay, what's your next stat?
All right, so the next stat is that Ohio's House has 99 representatives. Those are all of the elected officials in your Ohio House of Representatives. In 15 of those 99 districts, only one person is running for that seat in the House.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not great.
Come on.
It's not competition if no one is running against you.
And by the way, this is, just to be a reminder, this is bipartisan in that There are also very safe Democrat seats, because this is a compromise the Democrats made. They had to sign off on these.
2 Democrats.
Yes, 2 Democrats had to sign off on these, but they put themselves in very safe districts. So that can include those. That includes those as well.
That
safe
does.
Democrat districts.
That's true. Now, in 62 of the 99 districts, one political party is already expected to get 55% of the vote. That's one political party. That's not one
A person, yeah.
The political party. So that's how we know that gerrymandering is a problem here in Ohio. But there are some people who are fighting really hard to try and do away with the system as it currently exists.
And I had the opportunity to sit down with one of the best ones in the area as far as I'm concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to a wonder, Elinor Polster.
Spend their autumn years differently. Some golf, some garden, some advocate tirelessly for democracy. Elinor Polster is a 98-year-old activist who's been standing up for causes she believes in throughout her entire life.
I think wherever I've seen a situation that wasn't fair, I've tried to help.
She was a leading force in integration efforts on Cleveland's east side and helped prevent the construction of a proposed freeway that she believed would divide her community. Elinor won.
And look how that has helped the whole community.
Her current cause is advocating for a proposed ballot amendment that would change how Ohio draws its districts.
Our congressional districts in Ohio have been gerrymandered. They do not represent the basic population in each district, and that's not fair. So this is an effort to have an independent commission who would redistrict fairly to represent the population.
Elinor's strategy for collecting ballot signatures is simple. Find people and talk to them.
I do belong to the League of Women Voters. I take the petition wherever I go, even the grocery store. There's been no resistance. That's the lovely thing about this petition.
There are a lot of issues right now, though. There's obviously a lot of problems, and you've spent your lifetime fighting for issues that you care about. What is it about this one issue? Why is it so important to you?
Because it's important that people have their votes counted fairly.
Do you know that you're inspiring people by doing this, and how does that make you feel?
I don't think I'm inspired. I'm just working and helping with other people.
2 prominent leaders of the redistricting reform measure are 2 former Ohio Supreme Court justices, Republican Maureen O'Connor and Democrat Yvette McGee Brown. When we informed them about Elinor's efforts, they wanted to commend her personally.
That's why we're here, to say thank you and express our deep gratitude for your efforts to preserve democracy.
We're so grateful for you, for your passion, your commitment, for doing the hard work of getting this passed for our citizens who will come after us.
And thank you for being such outstanding women who are promoting everything that's so important.
People like you that inspire us, yeah.
And you know what? If we didn't have people like you coming before us, we wouldn't have been able to do what we've been fortunate enough and privileged enough to do in our careers. So thank you.
Well, I wish there were a million more like you. Thank you again.
Remarkable person, Elinor Polster, wasn't she?
She is delightful. I think that's fantastic that she is so active and engaged and concerned about her community.
She's been being a pain in the keister to a lot of people around here for the right reasons for a long time, and we honor that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think it's very cool that she got to connect with 2 of the people who are, spearheading the initiative that she's supporting.
Yeah, very cool of them, too, to show up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Former Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor. She was our first guest on Ohio Has Issues.
True.
And then also her colleague, former Ohio Supreme Court Justice Yvette McGee Brown. By the way, those 2 women are on opposite sides of the aisle.
Yes.
O'Connor is a Republican and McGee Brown is Democrat.
Yes, so they are doing what they think is best for their state, and I think it should be applauded.
And Yvette McGee Brown is our final guest for the show today, so I want to tell you a little bit about her. She served on the Ohio Supreme Court in 2011 and 2012. She ended up on the court. She was appointed to the position that was held by O'Connor when O'Connor was elected to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, so they worked together on the court. So talked with her a little bit about kind of the state of affairs today. By the way, she was also the first African-American woman to be appointed to the Ohio Supreme Court. So kudos to her, trailblazing, absolutely.
Seems a little late, but we'll take it.
Right, it should have been sooner,
Yeah.
for sure,
Sorry.
for sure. But she says that things are a lot different now than when she was on the bench, which is something that we talked about, and also getting into more details of how this redistricting amendment would work if it does pass, if people do vote for it here in Ohio. So let's hear from her now. Justice Yvette McGee Brown, thank you very much for being with us here on Ohio Has Issues.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
We're so happy to have you. You know, this is a topic that is super important, almost certainly going to be on the ballot here in November, and you're kind of a driving force behind the effort to get this proposed amendment for redistricting on the ballot. So I want to ask you now, you could champion a lot of causes. Why this cause?
Well, I care very much about this state. It's a state that I was raised in, a state that I have seen change in recent years to a state I don't recognize. I believe fervently in democracy, that every person should have their voice heard and counted. And I just think in our current gerrymandered state, that isn't happening. And so you'd have to understand, my grandmother was born in the Jim Crow South. She didn't get to vote until she was a very middle-aged woman, after she was in Ohio. And the one thing she stressed upon us is the importance of voting. And voting doesn't matter if you don't have equal access to your representatives and your voice can't be heard and your causes can't be considered.
So when we talk about gerrymandering here in Ohio, we know currently our legislature has a Republican supermajority. Now, you are championing this effort with your colleague, former Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor. She was with us on our premiere episode here on Ohio Has Issues. She's a Republican. You're a registered Democrat. So what is it about this cause that has brought the two of you together to work on something like this?
Because it's about fairness. We both believe in fairness, and we both have been on the side. I wrote the dissent when I was on the court back in 2012. She happened to be in the majority in the last 2 years when she was writing opinions. We just want an even playing field. Democracy is about fighting for ideas, and let's create districts. And our Constitution, from the time it was created until it was amended in 1955 and again in 2015 and 2018, the goal has always been to draw districts that keep communities together, people with shared interests, so they can elect representatives that represent their view of how they would like to see their state governed. That's all we're talking about. We're not saying it needs to be Republican or Democrat. We say it needs to be fair. And both political parties, when they've been in power, have been guilty of gerrymandering. So it's not really a partisan issue.
You know, I had an interesting conversation a while back with Lieutenant Governor John Husted, and I mentioned the shape of our districts right now.
Yes.
They're pretty wild looking. You'd be hard pressed to find anything that you'd be studying in a kindergarten shapes class in our voting districts. I guess I'll just put it that way. So I asked him about that, and he mentioned what you mentioned there about keeping communities together,
yes,
which is an interesting perspective when we see kind of the very squiggly little lines with like holes cut out of the middle in these districts. So I want to ask you now, can you tell me as simply as you can put it for people who may not understand this issue, what's wrong with the current situation with our voting districts?
So by law, we're required to have a certain number of people in every voting congressional district, in every voting state house and Senate district. What's happened now is that the politicians who've been drawing the maps have been doing it to protect themselves. And so what they do is they draw enough voters from their party into their district so that the fight is really at the primary. It's never at the general election. And we've seen that now, not only in our state legislature, but in our Congress, because we now have people on extremes from both parties, rather than where we think the majority of people are in the middle, and where there's a fight and a push and pull for ideas. I grew up under Vern Rife and Stan Aronoff. Stan Aronoff was the Republican president of the Senate. Vern Rife was the Democratic leader of the House, and you could find them most evenings after session sitting together talking about compromise. We don't have compromise anymore because everybody is trying to respond to the most extreme portion of their base, whether on the left or the right. We've got to get back to what the framers intended, and that is keeping communities together. And if you look at our Constitution, the way it was originally drafted, it said you started by going with townships, then cities, then counties until you got the requisite number so that you can make sure that people who share similar interests have a representative that supports and advances those interests.
That is an interesting point there. It is a bit reinventing the wheel to kind of get away from the township, city, county model and have these kind of, we'll say, for lack of a better term, very creative lines to the voting districts. Now, you mentioned there when you were serving on the bench that there seemed to be more of a collaborative approach. Why do you think things have gotten the way they are to these extreme partisan measures over the last decade or so?
Oh, I don't know. I think that it's interesting. I'm writing a commencement speech now because I'm giving a commencement address on Sunday, and I was rereading George Washington's farewell address. And one of the things he said as he left office was to beware of political parties. And I think what has happened is that we've become very tribal recently. And so there are a lot of people in the middle who don't feel like they relate to either party. And with the ability to access information quickly so that anybody who has a laptop is suddenly a journalist, you may, right? And so people are putting out opinions that aren't based up in fact, and many busy people are reading them and taking them as fact. And so we've got to get back to where we start to have an electorate that can choose people who represent them instead of the politicians choosing their voters. That's really what's happened. And as the Supreme Court has said in recent past that, you know, gerrymandering is a political function, drawing districts is a political function. It's kind of given free rein to people who want to select their voters. And I think the only way to change that is to give power back to the people to say, we want a representative democracy and our representatives have to be chosen by us. Let's have a free-for-all for ideas, but let's not have a predetermined outcome.
Now, as you mentioned there, getting it back into the hands of the people, determining who your representatives, who your senators are going to be. So right now, there'll be an election in November. A constitutional amendment will be on that ballot, of course, as long as it makes it through all of the necessary process, which we'll talk about in just a minute, that would change the way districts are drawn. But in the November election, we'll be voting on yet another set of districts that were passed in the last fall. So that aside, our ever-changing districts, the ever-shifting shape of these districts, can you explain to us how the initiative would work, the Citizens Not Politicians initiative, the group kind of backing that, pushing that in collaboration with you and the Chief Justice O'Connor? How would it work if that passes on the ballot in November for the future?
So there will be a 15-member committee of retired judges, right? So there'll be 5 Democrats, or excuse me, there'll be a committee of retired judges that will select 15 citizens, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, 5 independents. And there's certain rules because we've learned you have to be very specific or people will play games with the rules. So we've learned the rules say that you can't be a former or current elected official. Your spouse or significant other can't have been a current or former elected official. And people will apply and they will be selected by this committee of 5 retired judges.
Okay. And do you have it worked out yet? How those 5 retired judges will be selected? Will that be an appointment process? Will people kind of volunteer and apply? Any idea?
That will be, people will apply for that. And as I'm talking to you, I don't have the specifics of how those 5 are selected, but it would be a bipartisan process and they'll be retired judges. So these will not be partisan politicians who have engaged in electoral politics that are selecting the 15-member commission. Okay. They will submit their names for consideration though.
Okay. And if this initiative passes in November and we are moving forward to a system where 15 people, these 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, 5 independents, will then be working to draw our voting districts. Is it too soon to ask when those districts might go into effect?
Yeah, it is too soon because there's going to have to be, the amendment will pass and then there'll have to be some enabling legislation. But right now, the districts that we have are in effect for another 6 years. That will decrease because once we get the commission set up and we get it funded, I would say no more than 2 years before we have new districts.
Okay. Now let's talk about the initiative. Right now it's in the signature gathering phase and the deadline is July 3rd to get those signatures to the Ohio Secretary of State to get that on the ballot. So I want to ask, how's that going?
You know what? It is going amazingly well. I have been so impressed with the people across this state who have volunteered. And it's not easy to go up to strangers and ask them to sign a petition. We have people across the state who have volunteered to collect signatures, including Elinor Polster, who's 98 years old, who, is going out getting people to sign petitions. So we are on track to meet that deadline. We feel very confident we will have enough signatures to qualify for the ballot.
Yes, and I know you and my co-host Mike and also Chief Justice O'Connor had the opportunity to talk with her. What was that like, just to kind of talk with someone who's so invested?
You know what? It was, for me, it was inspiring, because to think at 98 years old, she could be doing so many other things, but here is a woman who cares so much about our state and our country that she's going out collecting signatures. It made me feel like I'm not doing enough. I should be doing more. And I'm in awe of her. And I think if everybody took the kind of personal responsibility that she had, our democracy would be in a better place right now.
So that kind of leads me to my next question. For this kind of thing, and for really, all initiated ballot measures, how important is the grassroots support?
Oh, it is so important, because we're fortunate that Ohio is a referendum state, right? So we've got to collect signatures from 44 counties. So it really is people power. People have to believe in this initiative. They have to be willing to invest their own volunteer time when they have families and jobs. The fact that they show up and go out and collect signatures, it shows you how many people believe in this work. It wouldn't happen otherwise.
All right, one more question for you before we let you go here, Yvette. You studied journalism at Ohio University. OU, oh yeah, go Bobcats. It's one of my alums. I want to ask you, when we're covering this topic, to try and help people understand kind of what's at stake here, what's going to happen if this does pass, is there anything that comes to mind to you that we should kind of try to do, or how we can cover this the most fairly?
What I would just remind people is this is about one person, one vote, that everybody's vote should matter. And it doesn't matter now if you're in a predetermined district. The general election has to have value to you. So when you speak to people about this issue, tell them that it's giving them a voice. Even Governor DeWine has said we shouldn't have politicians drawing districts. And so tell them it's about returning power to them to have representative democracy based on their communities and their interests.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your time here on Ohio as Issues, Yvette. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Take good care.
Yvette McGee-Brown, thank you very much for the time. Ending note on that, they're pointing out again, Governor Mike DeWine even says that we should not have politicians drawing these districts.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I do sincerely believe, I know I've said this, but I do believe that is like a really quick way to not make everything better here in Ohio, but seriously improve our situation considerably. Just give people a fair voice. That's all that I think you heard most of the people on here asking for today.
Sure. Have the people be represented. The representative should be representing us. And by us, I mean the Ohio collective. And that's just not what's happening right now.
Right.
It's just not.
Also, maybe get the current president on our ballot.
Yeah,
he wants to be on there. And everybody wants him on there. I mean, Democrats, not everybody, obviously. But he's the president. That's part of the reason.
That's another thing that Governor DeWine is on board with, Republican Governor DeWine. He says we got to get the president on the ballot.
Seems like all these solutions are there. They seem relatively simple. We've just got to act now, Stephanie.
Right there. They're right in front of us.
Thank you for watching Ohio Has Issues again, folks.
We'll see you next week.
Bye now.